Hello, welcome to Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner, and we're talking all that is Minnesota Twins right now as we are in the middle of spring training. Not a lot is going on. I'm your host, CJ Baumgartner. This is Bombs Away again, as just previously mentioned, and a lot of stuff not really happening when it comes to spring training and what's going on with the team because it's just the dog days of it. Nothing much is happening. The whole kind of baseball is back vibe has gone away. And what we're all really worried about is everybody, going to be really healthy for opening day? And we'll get into that later. But right now, the World Baseball Classic is also going on. And that's also what's taking up a bunch of time and a bunch of everyone's energy around the baseball world. And I think it's a good thing. Love the World Baseball Classic, and that's not just because the United States won the last one. I think it's a really good idea. I don't know if it'll ever become what I think baseball wants it to become, but at the same time, it's a fun little distraction every 4 years to get to do an event like this and to get to really see what happens in the international baseball community. Because I love Major League Baseball as like the teams. I love the teams. I love the history. I love that. But at the same time, you ever watch some of these games that take place in Venezuela, in the Dominican winter leagues? You see some of these ball games and you see these people go bat bleep insane over baseball, and it's really, really fun. And it's an atmosphere that I wish people in the States would adopt a little bit more. They treat baseball like it's a football or even a soccer game, and it's really, really fun to see. And obviously it's apples to oranges a little bit just on, whatever country. Certain countries don't, like sports as much as they do the other ones, like football. Maybe they don't go as crazy as over there. In other parts of the world, I don't know. But my whole point is it's really fun to see these people go absolutely bananas for baseball. And it makes me wish sometimes that there was more of that at Target Field, or there was more of that just across baseball in general. And I think that's some of the fun part, is getting to see these cultures come together and enjoy baseball. Because as much as soccer is a worldwide sport, baseball is a worldwide sport as well. And it's something that Major League Baseball needs to tap into more. Kind of like what the NBA wants to do with basketball, or what the NFL is trying to do across the world as well, trying to grow it and make it become an international sport. Baseball already has that infrastructure in Korea, in Japan, in Latin America, in all these places. I just wish that it'd develop a little bit more than what it is. But anyway, that's just a little bit of my rant. Anyways, the World Baseball Classic is fun, and it's fun to get to see these kind of teams come together. Of course, we never really get to see the giant super teams. Like Puerto Rico could have been just massively amazing. Carlos Correa is not going to be on the team, or wasn't on the team, because he just had the birth of a second child. There's also Jose Miranda that didn't get to play, and those are just a couple Twins that come to mind. Yohan Duran is not going to be in the World Baseball Classic either. He's not playing for Puerto Rico, but you get my point. There's some, not just Twin stars, but baseball stars across the league that aren't playing because of injuries, or because they just rather focus on the regular season of baseball where they're getting paid and all that kind of stuff. But World Baseball Classic is fun. I'm glad it's something that's happening. I'm trying to finish up this podcast in a decent amount of time so I can watch the United States play Mexico tonight. But outside of that, let's talk some Twins baseball as spring training continues. Let's go over some of the storylines, some of the news and notes that's been taking place over the last week or so. We have Jorge Lopez and Pablo Lopez. Pablo Lopez, by the way, 4 2/3 innings, 0 earned runs. A great outing for him in his World Baseball Classic debut in 2023. There's Christian Vasquez, Ed Julien. We'll get to Ed Julien as well, because he's been kind of the darling of spring training, been somebody that a lot of people have had their eyes on in the spring training for the Twins. He's a guy who can play a lot of infield spots. We talked about him on the podcast last week. Go listen to that podcast as well. He's a guy who can hit the ball a long ways, but his plate discipline and his ability to draw walks are probably his biggest attribute. And if you read Aaron Gleeman's article in The Athletic, he talks about how it's not just the fact of, oh, I just see a pitch I don't want to hit, I just don't swing. Because you find that in the minors, and especially if you watch young baseball. Go watch like 12-year-old baseball, and there'll be a kid and everyone's like, wow, he can draw walks like nothing. And it's just, he's just not aggressive, and he's just not swinging the bat at all. And the pitching's just not good enough. He can not swing the bat and get on base. I've umpired Little League games before, and it's one of those things where you punish kids a little bit for not swinging the bat. If it's a borderline ball strike call, you're going to rule it a strike because you're trying to incentivize young kids to swing the bat and put the ball in play and do all this kind of stuff. That's not Ed Julien. Ed Julien's a guy who wants to be aggressive in counts. He's a guy who swings the bat early, but also has a good eye where he's not going to swing at nonsense. And that allows him to get the walks, but it's not getting the walks for the sake of getting a walk. It's more of getting these walks and taking not great pitches so you can hit the good ones. And that's the thing sometimes you run into with some of these hitters where, yeah, they don't swing at non-strikes, but you can just pound the zone on them, and they're not strong enough to be able to hit the ball a long way because you're always in the strike zone. These guys will slap it around. Maybe they'll get some hits off you, but they're not going to put the ball over the fence. Ed Julien has the ability to put the baseball over the fence, and you could see it in his Team Canada debut. He hit a home run on his very first swing, and then he also drew a couple walks. And I think a home run with 2 walks is a slash line that we should get used to seeing on a game-by-game basis with Ed Julien if everything goes right. And we'll get to more on Julien and what his path to the big leagues looks like. We've already mentioned it in the last couple podcasts. Again, go check that out. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on YouTube as well. You can see the stream trying out a little different format. So if it looks a little wonky on the YouTube stream or sounds a little off, that's why. Anyway, so Ed Julien is having himself a nice little start to the WBC. Great Britain and Canada really just smashing the ball all around the yard because the pitching is not great. By the way, if you want my little Team USA preview for the World Baseball Classic, that lineup is good, really, really good. But the pitching is what's going to do them in. Adam Wainwright's your opening day guy, and you're starting Nick Martinez in this game. Again, not horrible, but like this is the best that you could scrape up for the WBC. I mean, the Verlanders and the Scherzers you're not going to get, but I don't know. It's Team USA probably won't win the WBC this year, and the reason why will probably be because of the pitching. But anywho, that's getting off topic. Great Britain and Canada, some ugly looking uniforms. I'm going to be honest. Great Britain has to take home the ugliest looking uniform. It literally just says Great Britain across the front. That's literally it. Like the thing on Twitter, like they use Arial bold font and just put it across the front. Nike didn't even try with that one. And honestly, why would you? There's no actual British guys on that team. It's a bunch of guys who's like, oh, my great-great-grandmother was British and I want to play in the WBC. So, I'm a minor league guy who I'm going to be playing baseball in AA anyway. So I might as well get a chance to be on international TV and try and hit the baseball around and maybe make a story for myself or network with rub elbows with some other people in the baseball world. Whatever. It's a fun experience also. But Team USA should walk out of this pool play very easily, them in Mexico. But we'll see. The USA game against Mexico should be pretty fun to see as well. So looking on with Ed Julien and with Brooks Lee, of course, because Carlos Correa is out for a little while, helping his wife who just had their second kid, as we mentioned earlier in the podcast. He's out of camp for a little bit. And because Ed Julien is with Team Canada, he's also out. Jorge Polanco is resting an injury. We'll talk about Jorge Polanco in a second, but there's just a perfect storm of Jose Miranda's not playing the field either. There's a perfect storm for there's a perfect storm for Brooks Lee to get a lot of at-bats in big league camp. Normally, this is the time when you start to cut down the roster a little bit and send guys to minor league camp. But Brooks Lee's going to get a chance to stick around a little longer than in a normal year because Correa's gone and Polanco's not healthy quite yet to play in games, and Jose Miranda's only hitting, which means that guys like Kyle Farmer, Donovan Solano, some of these guys who maybe you would put as a backup shortstop during the big league season, also Nick Gordon, those are guys who are either not healthy enough to be on the minor league field consistently, or also they're they're just not they're gonna fill in a different spot in the field. So it opens the door for Brooks Lee to get a lot of time in game situations. Now, game situations don't quite mean as much, it's like training camp. If you watch a preseason game and a guy does awesome and then the team cuts him and everybody goes, what the heck? How come we're seeing something that they don't? Well, the thing is we're not seeing as much as they are because they look at practice every day. And the same thing goes with Polanco and Buxton. We'll get to that in a second. The point is that the spring training games aren't quite everything, but at the same time, they're not nothing. They mean nothing and everything at the same time. But Brooks Lee is going to get an opportunity to get to play a lot in these minor league games, and he's going to get a chance to play a lot at shortstop. Now, whether the Twins eventually put Brooks Lee at third base or what have you when he actually gets to the major leagues at some point this year or for sure next season, it's likely not going to be at shortstop unless Correa all of a sudden moves to third base rather quickly, which would be a very bad sign for the Twins. So Brooks Lee, though, is going to get a lot of opportunities to play in these spring training games and to get to hit against big league pitching and just to get the game action and have a chance to endear himself to the fan base and to the front office and to the coaching staff and whatnot. We've already talked about Brooks Lee and what his path to the big leagues look like in the last podcast. Go check that out. But Brooks Lee has that opportunity to just be around longer than he should. And that might give him the opportunity maybe to not necessarily buy a spot onto the big league team, although he could, because again, spoiler alert on the injury notes, doesn't look like Alex Kirilloff is going to make the club out of spring training, just because they're trying to slow play his injuries. Now, whether it means the way the Twins made it sound is there wasn't a setback, but at the same time, there is a spot open. So with that spot open, ideally, maybe Larnach fills it, whatever. Maybe the Twins want to fill it with an infielder. And if they want to go that way, then maybe Brooks Lee is your guy. Maybe he's a guy that earns the opening day roster spot, or maybe he's a guy who earns that, hey, Jorge Polanco has to go on the IL, or Donovan Solano, or Kyle Farmer, Jose Miranda, Carlos Correa, whoever's that infielder that goes on the IL. Brooks Lee's the first guy to get called up, and maybe him being in big league camp longer than normal allows him to get a lot of those reps in front of the big league coaching staff and in front of the general manager and all that kind of stuff, and Falvey, the president of baseball ops. It's a bit of a long shot. The Twins probably are going to be patient with him because he's a top prospect. He's the Twins' #1 prospect, according to MLB.com. He's the Twins' recent first-round draft pick. He had a great year in the low minors and even a little bit in Double-A ball last year. Double-A ball probably where he starts the season, and they let him work through Triple-A and to the big leagues, but who knows with Brooks Lee. The point is that he's probably not going to come up yet. The Twins aren't going to rush up their top prospect just to send him right back down. The only reason that Brooks Lee would theoretically get up here is if it's a situation like the Twins had with Carlos Correa last year, where they called up Royce Lewis. And the whole point was like, well, let's get him a little dress rehearsal. Let's get a small look at him because we know that Correa is going to come back. And when Correa comes back, then it's going to be fine. So there's a very this is his window. It's not an indefinite thing. This is clearly when he's ready to go down, he'll go down. And Lewis played well enough to earn himself a call back up again. And with Lee, that could be the same situation where, hey, a guy's got to go on the 10-day IL. He's got a little wrist issue. He'll be back in a week. So let's have Brooks Lee come up. He'll play for this week. He'll get 4 games in and he'll get that experience. He'll get a little motivator and the fan base can kind of see who he is. Now, also Royce Lewis earned that promotion by hitting the crap out of the ball in AAA before getting called up in 2022 initially. But still, Brooks Lee has a chance to kind of show that he can hit the ball around the yard. Anyway, Ed Julien looks more like, if you were to compare the two, and I did in an article I wrote for Zone Coverage, go check that out, zonecoverage.com. But I think if you look, Julien probably is the guy that gets a call up over Brooks Lee. The only reason is because Brooks Lee is a bona fide, he's going to be a shortstop or a third baseman. This is a guy who's going to play a high leverage infield position, something that adds value to your team, not just stashing you away at second base. And stashing somebody away at second base is probably where Ed Julien goes. He's probably a guy that does get stashed at second base. So if Polanco has to go on the IL for a week, maybe Julian's the guy you put in that situation if you don't quite want to take away the flexibility you have with Solano and Farmer. So Julien could be the guy that I think gets the initial call up. If it's a battle between those two, I think the nod goes to Julien because of the fact that he's a walks machine. He has the patience to go against big league pitching. He has the power to hit at the big league level. And at the very least, it's the Billy Bean line. If he can just get on base, if he can draw walks and every once in a while hit a ball over the fence, then you're good. And I know that's not quite what the Twins maybe are looking to do, now that the ball's not quite as juiced and whatever, maybe they're not trying to rely so much on homers, but at the same time, Ed Julien could be a very nice piece for this team. And I think the maturity of his plate discipline and his vision definitely gives him an edge, as well as being able to hit the ball well. He's had more time in the Twins system. The Twins have seen a lot of him over the last few years compared to Brooks Lee, who is still really getting his feet wet in the Twins organization. He hasn't even been involved with the Minnesota Twins for a full calendar year. They drafted him in June. So it's been 9 months since he's been affiliated with the Twins. Maybe they want more time with him just to season him up a little bit. And again, Julien is a prospect. He's somebody that's catching eyes this offseason, but he's by no means like a top prospect. This is what you're building your core around. He can be a valuable asset to this team, but he's not a Jose Miranda, a Royce Lewis, a Brooks Lee, a Carlos Correa, Byron Buxton kind of centerpiece for this team. He's a guy that can help out and provide you with some surplus value as a platoon guy playing around the infield and doing the things he can do, drawing walks, hitting the ball over the fence, doing that kind of stuff. Anyway, so more Twins news and notes throughout spring training. Updates on Byron Buxton and Jorge Polanco from Derek Falvey. Seems like they're on schedule. They haven't gotten in any spring training games yet. I know that concerns some people, and I'm not saying that they're entirely wrong based on the injury history of Byron Buxton. We can never not be too concerned whenever the Twins are talking about injuries. Jorge Polanco ended the season with a knee injury, pretty bad, didn't play most of the second half of the season. So, I understand the reason to be cautious, especially with how injuries torpedoed last season. There's no reason to rush these guys in spring training, I think, is the big thing, which is why you shouldn't be as concerned maybe as you're feeling, or if you're not that concerned, then don't feel concerned, because it's spring training. And like we talked about before, with the NFL preseason, it doesn't always, just because you have a great NFL preseason or just because you get a ton of snaps in preseason, doesn't quite mean that you're ready to go for the start of the NFL season in the same way that the spring training is. Just because Byron Buxton and Jorge Polanco haven't taken live at-bats in a game situation doesn't mean that they're not getting as close to live at-bats as they can. They're facing live pitching in BP. With some live pitchers, and they get a lot more opportunities to see the baseball than if they were playing in a game. They can always have somebody hit them balls. They can always have somebody do all this stuff. Now, I know it's not the same as being in a game, but at the same time, I just think that it's not as worrisome maybe as some people are making it out to be, that Polanco and Buxton haven't gotten into a game yet. So I think let's wait another week or two. I mean, opening day still is 2.5 weeks away. So let's not get too ahead of ourselves with worrying about Buxton and Polanco. Honestly, if Buxton and Polanco didn't even play in a spring training game at all, personally, I don't think I'd be as concerned as most of the fan base. I trust that Falvey and Levine have a plan, and that they're trying, and based on what we saw last season, they've clearly made a plan to rest Buxton, even if he doesn't always need it, just because they want to be doubly sure. And I think that's what gives me confidence. Polanco, at the same time, there's no reason to rush him back because you know what you're getting in Jorge Polanco when he's healthy. And again, the thing is we talk a big deal of, maybe this guy's not quite ready to start the season. Maybe this guy's going to have to start the season on the IL. It's April. And if it's just hey, we're going to start you on the 10-day IL, maybe an extended spring training for a couple weeks, it's not the end of the world. Now, obviously, you don't want your team to be banged up and you don't want them to be rolling out a double-A lineup, but the Twins added all this depth to avoid that situation and have guys who can hold down the fort for a 1 to 2 week period while the other guys get healthy. So again, I'm not overly worried about Buxton and Polanco because I trust that they'll be back, and even still that they're not going to miss significant time because they're not they're coming back from previous injuries. They're not they didn't re-injure anything, or they didn't come into camp with an injury. They came into camp knowing that the Twins were going to slow cook their ramp up. And that, I think, is just based on prior information and now this new information, it doesn't discourage me. Now, if all of a sudden they're like, well, yeah, we might have to start the year on the 60-day IL, then I'd start to be pretty concerned, all things considered, when you look at the team. So that's my 2 cents on the Buxton and Polanco injury news. The one injury you can be concerned about, by the way, Nick Gordon, also fine. Again, maybe he starts the year in extended spring training. Nobody seems to be very concerned with him or Miranda. But it does look like Alex Kirilloff probably isn't going to be the guy, as we mentioned earlier. The Twins, and I can't quite tell based on reporting if it is we're trying to slow cook Alex Kirilloff and make sure he's all right, because we'd rather have him start his season on April 20th and be fully healthy than rush him to start the season on March 31st and then we have to go back on the IL and just mess with his rhythm. So I'm okay with resting Alex Kirilloff, and mainly because the Twins have that surplus of depth. So maybe Ed Julien is the guy who takes the opening day roster spot and plays a little first base, or allows Gallo to play first base, and then you have, Kepler in right field, and then you have maybe Michael Taylor in left, or whatever. Whatever route the Twins want to do. Maybe this just sets up Larnach to be the opening day left fielder, and then they move Gallo to first base and what have you. Or maybe you have Gallo be the left fielder, then you have Julien play first base. There's a bit of rotation. We've talked about this before. The Twins want to be Tampa Bay light. That's what I've always said about this organization. Rocco Baldelli's a Tampa Bay guy. Falvey and Levine have hired a lot of people from the Tampa Bay scouting department and trying to mimic in ways that Tampa has had success through the last 5 to 7 years. And it's not a horrible strategy, but just know that whatever the Twins try and do, if it sounds weird, think of if Tampa Bay has done it already, they're probably going to try and do it. And the thing about Tampa Bay is they like to shuffle guys and put guys in different spots and different days and different parts of the order. One day, a guy's going to be playing second base and hitting third in the order, and another time he's going to be playing left field and he's going to be hitting eighth. And it's going to just be a different mishmash of combinations. And that's not bad. It's just, we're going to put this lineup together like a puzzle piece. It's not inherently good nor bad. It just depends on the players you have and how often you do it. And it's a very fluid situation. And that's what the Twins are setting it up to be. So it's concerning that Alex Kirilloff isn't ready. I am concerned about that, because, man, if Alex Kirilloff is healthy, he's a good hitter and can do a lot of really good things for this team and take the offense to another level and really put the Twins in position to be a bona fide contender. At the same time, when he's not healthy, he's just not a productive big league baseball player. And it's frustrating. And the Twins can only wait on him for so long, especially when you have Brooks Lee and Royce Lewis and all these other guys ready, and Ed Julien ready to make the jump to the big leagues. You also have Trevor Larnach, who just hit a bomb in the Twins spring training game today. Looks like he could be a guy who's on track to start the season with the big league club, maybe even as the opening day left fielder, maybe as a DH. Who knows what the Twins want to go with. But that's where Minnesota stands in that regard. That's where the Twins end up looking. One last thing I will note, again, we've talked about this before with Paul Molitor coming to fix the base running for the Twins. Mentioned this in another article I wrote for Zone Coverage, that the Twins are one of the worst base running teams since Rocco Baldelli has been the manager. And when you look at the way that the Twins have shaped this team, they're not necessarily going to be the number one on a bullet base running team, but can they go from 32nd to 23rd? Because just doing that, how many runs does that create if you go from a dead last to below average base running team this year? Or maybe you start out that way and you try and work it up to by the end of the season being middle of the pack. If the Twins could go from being the worst base running team last year, and not just last year, by the way, the Twins are the worst base running team since Rocco Baldelli has been the manager in 2019. If they can go from that all the way up to middle of the pack, just think of how many more runs that'll create. Because it's not just that the Twins aren't stealing bases. That's not quite what I mean by base running. They just make dumb mistakes all the time on the base paths, whether it's taking an extra base and getting thrown out, whether it's not knowing how many outs there are. And part of that is because the Twins didn't have smart base runners. The other part of it is the Twins had a lot of slow base runners. Gio Urshela was slow. Gary Sanchez, Miguel Sano. A lot of these guys are just slow base runners. And then you have guys like Nick Gordon and Celestino who have speed, but don't quite know how to use it. They make bad base running decisions. You have guys like Byron Buxton who have the wheels, but they run so hard and aggressive that the Twins are afraid to use Byron Buxton at full speed because they don't want him sliding into second base and breaking his pinky, and then they can't use his bat. And that's why Byron Buxton only had like 3 steals last year or something, or 6 steals, somewhere along those lines. So Gio Urshela and Gary Sanchez, Miguel Sano, those are 3 of the Twins' worst base runners last season. Now you add Michael A. Taylor, you add Joey Gallo, who are good base runners. Max Kepler is a good base runner. Byron Buxton, of course, the Twins' best base runner. If you can smooth out Nick Gordon, that adds a lot. If you can just by proxy not having Gary Sanchez, that helps a lot. Now, Christian Vasquez isn't necessarily a giant step up, but Jose Miranda isn't a giant, is a step up from Gio Urshela, but at the same time isn't like you're going from bottom of the barrel to top of the class. You're going from very poor to below average to average base running. But at the same time, having those guys, having a Kyle Farmer on your team, having some of these other base runners does help out and does allow your team to be a little more flexible on the base paths. And I don't know if the Twins are going to just be running like the 2014, 2015 Kansas City Royals, or if they're just going to be a little more savvy on the base paths. But bringing in Paul Molitor was the right decision to do that, even though he was the Twins' previous manager to Baldelli, and good on Molitor for wanting to come back. I've mentioned a little bit of that in previous podcasts, but I think it's worth saying again with that as well. And I think, too, the Twins Baldelli taking the approach to say, hey, we have to get better at base running is important, because as a manager, there's not too many things you can control with your baseball team. You're a manager, not a coach, but base running is definitely an area, and especially in spring training, of coaching guys up and putting an emphasis on how much is that going to improve. You're not going to all of a sudden take a guy who's a horrible base runner and turn him into a great one, but can you just clip your way around the edges to taking a guy who's poor and making him below average, or a below average guy and just making him league average? And doing that only in a few players will make you score more runs because you'll have more outs to work with. Or all of a sudden a guy that gets thrown out at home plate ends up scoring, and you just allow more base runners and allow the Twins more opportunities to score throughout the season. Okay, so now let's take a look at our roster configuration and see how the Twins stack up in center field. And then we'll do the corner outfielders next week, and I think we'll have wrapped up all the positions. We started with starting pitching, relief pitching, catcher, first base, the rest of the infield, and then now we're at center field. And with center field, I mean, number 1 on a bullet, it's Byron Buxton, because he is, enough said, he's Byron Buxton. When healthy, he's one of the best players in baseball. He's an MVP candidate. If you extend Byron Buxton, I think there's a stat, I can't remember it off the name off the top of my head, but there's a stat where if you extend the pace of Byron Buxton's home runs and you extend that to an 150 game season, Byron Buxton has, I think, only behind Mike Trout, maybe one other player in terms of home runs hit in that stretch. Byron Buxton's a guy who hit like 28 home runs last season, and now I'm blanking on that number, and he didn't even play 100 ball games. So when healthy, Byron Buxton is one of the best hitters in baseball. It's just when healthy. And what can we see improvement on? What areas should Buxton improve on? One, he strikes out a lot. So maybe just finding a way to get more contact on the baseball. Again, you could argue, well, he makes contact just fine when he does get contact. You know, his if you put his OPS together, it looks good. But it all comes from his slugging. It all comes from the home runs and his ability to rip doubles, which again is a very important stat. But a way for Byron Buxton to round out the game a little bit would be finding a way to draw some walks in the same way of Ed Julien. You're drawing walks, not necessarily to draw walks, but using it as a way to make pitchers throw into the strike zone more. And Byron Buxton should be able to do that. And Buxton, by the way, is a guy who has improved in certain areas like that, little areas over the course of his career. Byron Buxton, if you remember when he came up, could not hit a curveball to save his life. And last season, Byron Buxton was one of the top guys in exit velocity against breaking pitches. So he's a guy that knows how to improve his craft and is a good ball player and student of the game, all that good stuff. I think he could improve his strikeout walk numbers just a little bit. And I also think, and this isn't a Buxton thing, it's more of a Twins thing, of let him run the bases a little bit more. Use that speed to your advantage. And especially if Buxton gets older and the top speed starts to decline, he still is a really fast baseball player. And maybe if he's just a step or two slower, you lose the speed, but you also gain the fact of he's not running as vicious as he has in previous years. So Byron Buxton, number one on the bullet. He's the Twins center fielder for the next, 5 years. He's going to be with the Twins till he retires, or he's going to go down with the main bulk of his career being a Minnesota Twin. Now down low on the list is where things get a little interesting. Michael A. Taylor is Byron Buxton light. We talked about that with Gilberto Celestino last week when we talked about his injury. Go back to the podcast and listen to that. Essentially, Gilberto Celestino could have fleshed out a nice little role as a Buxton light, doing all the things that Byron Buxton can do on a smaller scale. So he doesn't hit for power like Byron Buxton, but he does play a nice center field. He does have the legs. He has the range. His arm is powerful, but not really as refined. There's a lot of things Celestino can do that Buxton can on a better scale. Buxton is a better version of Celestino in every facet, but Celestino plays the game like Buxton. It's the way of, again, an NFL analogy would be you have Lamar Jackson as your quarterback, so you get his backup to be Robert Griffin III. You get a guy who does some of the same stuff that Lamar does, and like Tyler Huntley as a backup. Kirk Cousins has a Nick Mullins as a backup for the Vikings. You get a guy who plays the same kind of style. Josh Allen and Case Keenum for the Buffalo Bills. You get a guy who does some of the same things because it just helps your team flow. It helps the way you want to build a lineup. That being said, you're not going to put Michael A. Taylor or Celestino, in the 3 spot like you would Byron Buxton. So maybe it's an apples to oranges comparison, but you kind of get what I mean because of the intrinsic value of a center fielder. You just need your center fielder to be able to do certain things, and speed and range and a good arm is one of them. And Celestino and Michael A. Taylor fit that bill. Michael A. Taylor doesn't quite have the arm, I should say. He still has the range. And the one thing is he steals bases, but not as much as maybe you'd think. He's more of a good defender for his range. His range, his savviness in center is really what brings his value. He's a below average hitter. If he's in the lineup for Buxton, he's going to be hitting in the 7, 8, 9 spot of the order. You're not going to see Michael A. Taylor hitting 5th or even hitting 2nd most nights. I never say never, but you're just really not going to see him in that role because he's more of a liability as a hitter, but he plays such a nice center field, which is why a platoon role really will be nice for him, and a role backing up Byron Buxton. He'll still get plenty of time in center field, maybe even in the corner outfield. There's also DHing, pinch running. He's going to be used even if he's not a full-time starter, but he does that Buxton light, and I really good on the Twins for going to get him and using him as Buxton light. And they're going to this season. Celestino could have been that, but as we talked about last week, he was rushed through the minors, so he never got the opportunity to fully develop through the minor leagues and face minor league pitching and just really get to be a natural prospect. He got yanked up because the Twins didn't have any options when Buxton got hurt early in the 2021 season. So Celestino had really not faced any high minors pitching. He had like 2 weeks of AA ball before getting called up to the big leagues. He struggled. He struggled as a hitter for that reason. So it stinks that he's missing time with the thumb surgery, although I do think he'll be back in like late April, maybe early May. He's going to be out 1 to 2 months essentially with that thumb surgery. So if you're the Twins, you just want him to come back, get some time, let him cook. He's still like 24, 25 years old. He's a very young prospect. Let him sit in the minors for another season or two, and then he can come back up, and then you can see what you have in him. That being said, I think Celestino's ceiling is a guy like Michael A. Taylor in terms of the value he brings to a team, which is a backup center fielder who can play sporadically or maybe play in like week-long spurts if need be, but probably will never be a bona fide center fielder. And that's just because it's really hard to be a center fielder. It's like the shortstop of the outfield in terms of a lot of guys come through the minor leagues as center fielders because they're really athletic or they can do this well or that well. And then they usually end up branching off into different positions, kind of like you do a shortstop. Everybody as a minor leaguer comes through as a shortstop, and then all of a sudden they turn into a second baseman. And you're like, wow, this guy's arm sucks. Why was he a shortstop? It's like, well, he was a really good athlete when he was 18, and now that he's 23, he's not quite that same. He's not quite that same guy. So that's the case with Celestino as well as Michael A. Taylor. Joey Gallo, Max Kepler, I kind of have them as the same guy because they're both fill-in outfielders in center field, I should say. They're both fill-in center fielders. Max Kepler has been that fill-in center fielder in years past, although according to reports and just things that I've heard on people who are in the know, listening to their podcasts, that Max Kepler really did not want to play center field again, and I can respect that. He's getting into his 30s. He's built his nice little home as a right fielder. There's no reason you really need to pull him over unless it's absolute necessity. And it was last season for the Twins, and it had been in certain situations. Max Kepler really is a right fielder. There's no reason to think he's not. And, we'll talk more on Max Kepler as a hitter and like what his role can be for the Twins this year later, but that's pretty much it. Joey Gallo has the arm to be a center fielder. He's got sneakier range than you think, but at the same time, he doesn't have that center fielder range. And the same thing with Kepler is playing center field probably holds true for Gallo, which is, how is it? Do you have good range? And do you play a good outfield because you can cover a lot of ground? Or is it you have a center fielder who covers a lot of ground, which means you don't have to cover as much and you're only responsible for a smaller portion, which means you can really hone in on that area. And that's, I think, why Max Kepler is such a great right fielder, is because Byron Buxton has the range to work the gaps. He needs to focus down the line and he needs to focus off the wall and all of that stuff. And that's why he got really good at it, because Buxton took away the pressure to have to worry about the gaps because Byron Buxton could take care of that. Anyway, Joey Gallo got the arm to be a center fielder. He'll probably be in there from time to time, but I think especially with the addition of Taylor, the Twins really don't want to use Gallo as a center fielder. They really want to keep him as a corner outfielder, most likely a left fielder. All right, looking down the pipe for the Twins, Misel Urbina, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, although I'm probably not. 20-year-old prospect, but 8th in the Twins farm system, according to MLB.com. He's got some speed, although maybe not enough to stick as a center fielder long term. A decent eye at the plate, still needs to develop some power. Still hasn't ascended past low A ball, so you're not going to see Urbina for a while. You're not going to see him for like 3-4 years at best with him, if at all. Austin Martin. Again, another guy who could be a fill-in center fielder. He could also be a corner outfielder. Who knows if he sticks? Austin Martin probably profiles more as a second baseman, corner outfielder. But either way, he's a guy who had some play in center. And again, I always thought that Austin Martin was like a backup plan in case the Twins couldn't have gotten Buxton to sign a long-term deal, because it meant you could have put Royce Lewis in center field or Austin Martin in center field and then leave the other one at shortstop. So you kind of had both of those holes plugged on two of the most important positions on the field. And it just never materialized that way because Buxton stayed. And then now you have Correa. So it really, to the Twins, I mean, they're okay that it didn't go according to plan, but those contingency plans never really followed through. And Austin Martin, of course, tore his UCL partially. And it's not clear if he needs Tommy John surgery. They're going to see if he can play through it. So we'll see what the Twins actually end up doing with him. But again, when it comes to Austin Martin, he's a guy that hit the ball really well through his Blue Jays minors career and as a college player at Vanderbilt, one of the most prestigious college programs in baseball. And then the Twins tried to tap into that power a little bit to see if he could get a little more of the home run numbers. And that didn't work. He had a really bad first half of last season in the minors, also battled through some injuries. And then decided when he came back to be like, you know what, I'm just going to go to my bread and butter. I'm just going to be a singles hitter. I'm going to be a guy who focuses more on contact and hitting the ball all over the yard. And then you saw the numbers go up a little bit, and you had reason to be optimistic about Austin Martin having a good year in AAA and maybe even getting to the big leagues. And now his season's kaput. And that's a shame, because I'm not high on Austin Martin by chance. I don't really see a path for him. I don't know necessarily what his role is on this team, but at the same time, he's a guy that the Twins have invested a lot of draft capital in. He was the headliner of the Jose Barrios trade. It was him and Simeon Woods Richardson, but Austin Martin was like the third best prospect in the Blue Jays system when he came over, and him and Royce Lewis last year were 1 and 2 to try and be that number one Twins prospect. And speaking of Royce Lewis, he also was on this list, but of course he's going to miss the first half of the season for sure. And we'll see. I don't see the Twins using him a ton in center field, mainly because he ran into the wall and wrecked his knee. So I could see the Twins being scared of wanting to put him back in that situation. At the same time, he's athletic enough to play center field. He has the arm, he has the speed, he has the smarts to be able to learn the position at the major league level. He played in the minors too, but I think the Twins end up stashing him at the infield. But again, if Brooks Lee gets up here and plays third base, or Miranda sticks at third base, there's just not a lot of place for Royce Lewis to go other than maybe as a center fielder. Jorge Polanco at second base. Again, there's a lot of, if the things pan out the way the Twins want to, they'll have an embarrassment of riches. But again, at the same time, I don't quite know how that's all. I don't know if it's quite going to pan out, because nothing really ever does. Baseball is, and especially with how long the season is, how much guys just get nicked up throughout the season, there's a lot of ebbs and flows, and there's a lot of times where things don't pan out more than they actually do pan out when it comes to injuries and when it comes to guys becoming good major league ball players. But with Royce Lewis, I don't see him playing a ton of center field because of Michael A. Taylor being there, because of Joey Gallo being an option, and maybe the Twins don't want to rush him out into that spot. But if it's the only place that gets him onto the field and he's hitting the ball really well, the Twins will just put him there and they'll figure it out from that point. Really, there's nobody else in the Twin system. It is just a bunch of teenagers and 20-year-olds and guys who, like, international draft class signees who are on the prospect list, but they're on the prospect list because they're recently added. So there's a lot of hype with them. There's a lot of intrigue. There's a lot of raw talent. There's nobody really to get excited about in terms of center fielder. And again, you just don't have as many center fielders. The corner outfield list is just a mile long for the Minnesota Twins, or the corner infielder list is a mile long. Second base is a mile long. When it comes to shortstop and center field, those are some of the ones where there'll be a lot of guys who initially profile at that position, but never stick. Catcher, there's always going to be a lot of guys on a roster, but that's just because you need catchers. You need them because you need them because there's not anybody who can go from not playing catcher to playing catcher. So you always want to make sure you have them on your roster. All right. Well, I think that's going to wrap it up for me. I'm CJ Baumgartner. This has been Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. Catch us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts, as well as YouTube. Check out the video. Again, trying a little something different with the setup. I actually have my mic just below my chest here. If you're watching on the YouTube feed, trying to block it out so I can get just looks a little wonky when it covered up half my face. So we're trying that out to see if it's a little bit better. If it sounds bad, don't worry, I'll end up fixing it for next podcast and we'll just figure out a different solution. This is my at-home setup. I do not have a big budget and it sometimes shows, but I appreciate you guys for listening as well. I've seen the numbers on the podcast start to go up a little bit and I really, really appreciate the listening. I really appreciate you guys tuning in, and it's awesome to see this podcast, not a huge growth, but very steady growth, and something that I'm very thankful for you guys to be listening in on and starting to build this together, especially as we get towards the beginning of the regular season and we get through the baseball season. I'm really excited and I really hope you guys jump on and we get to talk Twins. If the podcast gets big enough, I'd love to do, the classic things like a mailbag. I'd love to do some more interactions, working to try and, maybe get some people on the podcast. We'll see how that goes. But again, want this podcast to grow. And that's why I'm willing to try new things and do different stuff. And you guys keep listening, because that makes me want to do that, because it means that things are working and things are getting better, and I want to get better and make the podcast as good as it can be for you guys, because I just love talking Twins. I'm just a guy with a mic in a spare bedroom talking Twins baseball, and I love it, and I love that you guys want to listen. And let's keep this thing going, huh? This has been Bombs Away, a Minnesota Twins podcast. I'm CJ Baumgartner. See you next time.